Welcome back to Whiskey Politics, Ricochet.com. We're coming to you from FreedomFest, and I'm delighted to be sitting here today with Nick Gillespie, Editor-in-Chief at Reason.com, Reason TV. You're all over the place right now.
I am, and we in the past 8 months we added a Reason podcast that on the Graham Kuba as well. So
that's awesome.
Yeah,
and that's on iTunes, Stitcher,
Stitcher, SoundCloud. Yep.
Great. Well, listen, I'm really happy to be sitting with you here today, and we've got Hyperion Night behind us, tickling the ivory. So hopefully everybody can hear us. But delighted to have you with us because obviously we are at FreedomFest, free markets, free minds.
Right.
Did you come up with that, free markets, free minds?
Reason Magazine, which was the first product we had in the Reason family of products, was established in 1968 by a guy who was living in Boston. And within a couple of issues, by the end of its first year, that phrase "free minds and free markets" had crept in. I don't know when we exactly started using it as a kind of tagline or a slogan, but what the point of it was that it got at for him, this character Lanny Friedlander, who died a few years ago, was that civil liberties and economic liberties, cultural liberties, lifestyle liberties, these are all conjoined. So you want free minds and free markets. And it's stuck. It helps people kind of put some meat on the bones. Reason is obviously an abstract concept.
Right. Well, talking about that, and what I'd love to do is to get a couple of policy things, because you're here this week, and you've been on several panels, and you are an outspoken critic of this president.
Yeah, well, actually, let me put it this way.
Okay.
I am not a never-Trumper. I wouldn't even say that I'm anti-Trump, and I was in a debate that was supposed to be
a little heated.
Well, a lot of heat, not so much light. And I think if you were cooking on that thing, you scorched everything. What I think is, I do think that there are many, many negatives to Donald Trump. I think the way that he governs, I think his personal tones, I think his policy positions on things like immigration and free trade especially really bother me. I think he's incoherent on foreign policy. I don't think he understands how economies work. Having said all of that, there's also no question that he has already done, without signing any major legislation in the first 100 days of his presidency, by appointing people like Scott Pruitt and Scott Gottlieb and Betsy DeVos, Retta Pai to Department of Education, FDA, EPA, FCC. He's by pulling out of the Paris Accords, he's actually doing certain things that are very positive, very good, and I think he's forcing both Republicans and Democrats to kind of own their actual positions. Because he doesn't quite fit into this stuff. So I think he's not a change agent in the sense of, he's not going in there and saying he's not Ronald Reagan. I've got these ideas and I'm going to bring people to them and pass them. He is a disruptor. He's a wild card. He's almost like Bugs Bunny or a trickster figure. Okay. And I think a lot of good can come out of that, assuming the other people in the political ecosystem, the Democrats, the Republicans, the Supreme Court, the voters, we have to play our role to hem him in from his worst tendencies.
So, to stay on that theme, I mean, when you talk about all of the cabinet members and the people that he's been putting in and some of the policy decisions that he's putting in as well, I mean, shouldn't the right be applauding that? Shouldn't libertarians be applauding that? We're talking about lowering regulations.
Yeah, absolutely. So they should be. One of the problems, I think, and I talked about this in that panel debate we had about it, is that I fully believe in Trump derangement syndrome, and I think it affects both people who hate Trump and people who like Trump, people on the right and people on the left. And so you have somebody like a Sean Hannity on Fox News who is he has the biggest man crush on Donald Trump, and whatever Donald does, he will defend and support. Yeah. He's like the fifth Trump child or something like that. That's messed up. It's stupid.
And it was that way early in the campaign.
Yeah, but then you also have people who, no matter what Trump does, within the Republican Party, and some libertarians, even if he does things like, he's pushing for school choice under Betsy DeVos, she's pushing forward on school choice as much as the federal government is involved in that. wants to roll back the Title IX rulings from the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, which gave rise to this lowered standard for guilt in sexual assault cases on campuses, which is one of the reasons why colleges are so screwed up now.
Yeah.
So, that's all good. Pulling out of the Paris Accords, absolutely a good thing.
Vacillating last week with Macron.
Yeah, no, a little bit. But what I'm saying is these things, and then on the left, they're just like, can you believe, like, he eats with his hands, he does this, he does that. It's just, it's embarrassing. And again, I agree. I think, and this is for me as a libertarian, and I'm a small L libertarian, I don't care about individuals in politics. I don't care about parties. I care about policy. I don't care about, not politicians, policy. Not parties, policy, not partisanship. It's got to be that. And there is stuff here to applaud.
Okay, which is good to hear. You've been a vocal critic leading up to this week as well, and I follow you on Twitter and so on. And
I apologize.
It's entertaining, and actually it's very informative. The thing is that you have been, you've said that Trump is bad for libertarianism. Right, libertarians. I mean, is that something that you?
Well, you know what? And many of the things that he is doing are bad for, is bad for libertarianism. And you can just say Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions, a very important cabinet pick. I mean, and there is there's kind of like the A list and the B list cabinet members, and stuff like transportation. And education even matters, but it's not like the Attorney General or Secretary of State or anything like that. Jeff Sessions is a complete waste or a complete nightmare for libertarian ideas, and I think for most conservatives who believe in limited government and rule-bound government, because he's talking about immigration he's horrible on, and whether or not you want more or fewer immigrants, he is talking about beefing up enforcement of immigration laws, which means that all of us, legal, not legal, native-born, foreign-born, we are all being snared up in more and more stuff like that. And personally, I think it's over hysteria, but asset forfeiture, drug policy. I mean, he is not just wants to restart or reinvigorate the war on drugs. He's against pot legalization in states that have decided by popular vote or legislative action to allow medical and recreational pot. He's a bad guy, and in that sense, I think Trump is bad. I think Trump, when it comes to regulation, on the one hand, he's great. He's putting in deregulators who are already getting rid of a bunch of really stupid Obama-era regulations like net neutrality, say, or these Title IX rulings for college campuses. On the other hand, Trump's budget, if it was enacted as passed, would actually increase the amount of money spent on regulatory activity. So it's, this is one of the frustrations with Trump is that he's not a systematic thinker, and he has very clear feelings, but they change every day. I mean, it's like the weather in summer in Ohio or something. It's like, it's raining, it's clear, it's raining, then there's a tornado. I mean, it just keeps, each one is intense, but they don't add up to a pretty day. And that troubles me a bit. I also, by the way, the other thing where Trump, for libertarians, I think most libertarians, and I only speak for myself, and even then, not always, but most libertarians want less of a militaristic intervening armed forces. I believe in a strong military, a strong defense to keep America safe.
Right.
I want to see fewer troops, fewer bombs, fewer occupations or invasions.
You're not looking for America to be an island.
Oh no, not at all. Okay. And it isn't. And it's trade and and diplomacy should be the big things. He's given mixed messages. I mean, so far, Obama was terrible on this. Bush obviously was terrible. Obama probably as bad. Trump seemed to be less likely to just start bombing countries, and to date he has been, with the exception of Syria. I love the fact that when he went to Europe, and I know a lot of people, a lot of liberals and a lot of conservatives, when he was like, NATO should pay more, Europe should pay more for its own defense. It's a wealthy part of the world. Right. People were flipping out. To me, I was like, yes, absolutely. And
just as a percentage of your GDP, like everybody else.
Yeah, and you know what else is fascinating about Trump, and this is where, I don't know if it's good for him or bad for him, but the derangement syndrome is so much that, like, when he went and spoke in Poland before the G20 meeting, everybody was like, oh, he was talking about Western civilization in such this narrow way. And the narrow way was that he believed like in equal rights and universal human rights for women and
the
gays.
The left called it that, like a white supremacist
it was like a Sig Heil thing.
Right?
No, and it was like all he was saying is like, women should be, as bad at drivers as they are, women should be allowed to drive, right? I mean, that was like the worst thing he said. But the other thing, because of all of that crap, people miss the fact that he also brokered a major liquefied natural gas deal with Poland and other parts of Central Europe. Obama and previous regulations didn't like the exporting of liquefied natural gas, and we have a ton of it. And by bringing that to Central Europe, he's actually undercutting Russia, because Russia is a major supplier, if not the major supplier, of Eastern and Central Europe.
Right.
So, basically what he was doing was, under the cover of bad press coverage or incomplete press coverage, he was actually giving people in Europe like a real, a lifeline. And that again, I don't know. He comes across as so relentlessly idiotic. I don't know if he's doing this on purpose or it's by accident.
Chess? I mean, is it?
But on another level, as long as it's working,
Is it working?
I don't know. I mean, the other thing, and this is a weird thing for a libertarian to be saying, but because libertarians generally are very critical of government, and they, like you go to a libertarian convention or whatever, and people say the government can't do anything right. It can't deliver the mail. It can't bomb countries. It can't occupy countries. It can't teach our kids. I remember a couple of years ago in the libertarian community. Actually, this was about 20 years ago. When remember Joycelyn Elders, who was Bill Clinton's secretary of or general, general. Right. She was the. I was going to say the taskmaster general.
HHS.
Yeah, she was the surgeon general.
She was surgeon general.
And
that's
at one point she said, we've got to teach better sex ed to kids, and schools should, even be teaching them masturbation. And I remember thinking, my God, if the government starts teaching kids how to masturbate, we're going to fall even further behind on those international test scores.
Yeah.
But this is, typical libertarian thinking is the government is terrible, it's incompetent at everything.
Right.
And there's a lot of truth to that, but what we have had, especially in the 21st century, and between Bush, who made a lot of mistakes, really screwed up foreign policy, added massive trillions of dollars to the debt and spent more than he took in taxes. Obama, who lied about surveillance, who lied about being a peace president, who lied for the first 6 years of his presidency that he was, he gave signals he was going to relax the war on pot. He raided more medical marijuana dispensaries in California than Bush did. He deported more immigrants than Bush did, et cetera. He put reporters in jail. So we've had these terrible, incompetent and lying or dissembling presidents. It drives down confidence in government, and I think, and this is where it's weird for a libertarian to say this, is I don't want an incompetent government. I want a government that is smaller, that it spends less and it does less and it regulates less. But what it does do, it's actually really competent at. And the big fear for me with Trump is that he is driving down, we're already at, maybe it's Congress is in the single digits. The presidency is in the 30s or something. It's got terrible approval ratings. Other institutions outside of politics in America, things like law enforcement, the media, et cetera, if you look at the long-term trends of confidence in major American institutions that kind of contribute to our quality of life, they're all, confidence is being eroded for good reason. I mean, the media bullshits about everything, but if you go from a high-trust society, which we are generally, to a low-trust society, all kinds of weird, bad stuff happens. And among other things, people get more selfish because they're afraid things are going to go down the tubes. Ironically, from looking at the experience of other countries, people know the government is both corrupt and incompetent, but they vote in for more regulation and more control to kind of stop the bleeding. And you end up getting into this death spiral of we know the government is corrupt, but we need somebody to stop the corruption or the incompetency. And that's my big fear about somebody like Trump and Congress. I mean, Paul Ryan, incompetent. He can't manage his caucus in the House. Mitch McConnell can't bring his people together. The Democrats, nobody can get anything done. Mm-hmm. And again, I recognize libertarians kind of like gridlock. Libertarians think government is awful. I think government needs to do fewer things better, and we need people who will exude and enact competent reforms.
Okay, and that would be your ultimate goal, and Ricochet is made up of a lot of different types of conservatives.
Sure.
You've got free market, you've got social conservatives, you've got libertarians, you've got fiscal. The argument that's gone back and forth on Ricochet well over, not just this election, but over the years as well, is the idea of the ideology of libertarianism as a controlling, governing body. Okay, what does that look like? You refer to lesser government, lesser control, doing smaller things. What say you to those individuals that basically say, no, we need to contract and just focus on nothingness almost?
Yeah, well, over the past few years, and I've been associated with, I've been working at Reason since October of '93. So I'm kind of, this is like a quarter century basically. It's like a professional libertarian. Before that, I was a reader of the magazine. I read widely in the kind of intellectual history and genealogy of libertarianism. Over the past couple of years, it's become clearer and clearer to me that, a lot of libertarians are probably they might call themselves libertarians. They actually are anarchists, and they say, we don't need anything and we don't want anything. But they tend to be situational anarchists. So, they never will be just blow it all up and then we'll see what happens and it'll be fine because we're self-organizing and all of that. And it's mostly that, libertarians, like different types of conservatives or liberals or progressives, at least 99% of your time is spent explaining why you're the real thing and you are just a faker and a poser, and, your fights are always with people within your group.
Yeah.
I recognize libertarianism or classical liberalism. It believes in a strongly limited government. The default setting on any question about politics should be, looking in the direction of doing less and spending less. There are times where you override that for various reasons, but think of it as like when you get a new computer program or an app and it comes with default settings. Like my default settings for running the country, they'd all come from the factory switch to less.
Right.
Having said that, what we we've been spending as a percentage of GDP for years now, like around 20% of GDP or higher. We've been taking in, anywhere from 15% to maybe 17, sometimes 18%. As a starting point here, I would say from a libertarian point of view, we got to figure out how to narrow that gap, because historically we've had 1 or 2 years where we've cracked 19%, but generally we know under wildly different tax policies, going back to Truman and Eisenhower, we're lucky that on average we're going to get about 18% of GDP. That should be the limit of what we're allowed to spend in a given year, unless there's a interplanetary invasion or something like that. When you look at a lot of specific policies, I would like the government. I think we need to get out of the entitlement business. Entitlements were started by Bismarck in Germany in the 19th century. Very different world, and for very different reasons. It was basically to quiet the masses, to stop socialist revolution or other types of upheaval. The demographics of universal entitlements that keep growing, and in America, we're talking Social Security and Medicare for the most part. When Social Security was passed in the 30s, it was something like a couple of hundred contributors to one beneficiary.
Yeah.
Now it's like 3 to 1 or 2 point something to 1, and it's only going to get worse. That very idea has to go. It is unworkable in the 21st century, and I would much rather see the government say, we are going to, and again, this isn't anarchistic, I think it's fully consistent with libertarianism, a strictly limited government. We're going to help poor people below the line of poverty, and we're going to give them cash transfers to make their lives livable, and we'll also figure out a way to incentivize them to get beyond that as quickly as possible. But we got to get rid of Social Security. I'm 53. I'm not going to see what I got, and it would be much better to confront the issue now and say, okay, we're stopping this. There's a glide path for some people in it, and we're coming up with a new way of helping people who are poor, not necessarily just old, because this is also the difference up through the 60s when Medicare was passed. If you were old, you were more likely to be poor. Now, if you're old, you're more likely to be in the top income, top quartile, the top 25% of income households. So we got to get to that. We got to do less, and we got to do it smarter. Cash grants. What I love about school vouchers, part of me wants to say, get the state out of education. The state should no more be in education than it should be in religion. Absent that, take the money that the state gives to education and give it to the student and the parents. That would be great.
John Stossel's just joined Reason.
Yes, that's right.
Talk a little bit about what's happening with that.
John Stossel, a broadcasting legend. And
we had him here on Whiskey Politics a couple days ago.
But he was at ABC News for a long time. He was at Fox Business for a long time. And now he's coming to Reason. He's going to be doing weekly video documentaries and other segments for us. What is really great about this is it shows that John is continually growing and he's moving to where the audience is. From broadcast news, which was good. He was, because of the politics, he was kept from doing the things he wanted. He got to do more of that at Fox, but now online has an unlimited audience. The other thing that's a great coming home for that is that he said at multiple times and in various books and places, he said it here earlier, he said, that he started out as a consumer reporter, and then he started realizing that businessmen weren't the villains. Most of the time they were just trying to make a buck, and they were doing good things for people, giving them better and better products at cheaper and cheaper prices. He looked in conservative magazines and liberal magazines to find an ideology that explained that, and he literally says, and they didn't speak to him, and then he said, I found Reason, and they called themselves libertarians, and this stuff made sense.
Looking forward to seeing all of that. It's great stuff. Real quick question, a last question for you, and I appreciate you taking the time. When you take a look at the purists that are out there, you see them on Twitter, they follow you on Facebook and so on. We see them on Ricochet as well. What say you to those individuals that give you it was either or Trump or Hillary? The next election, it's either going to be the Democrat or Republican. And I know you're a big Gary Johnson supporter.
I voted for Gary Johnson. I like Gary Johnson. And, here... There are a couple of answers, okay? Because it's true. It's like for the foreseeable future, it's going to be a Democrat or a Republican.
Right.
A couple things. One is that individuals matter, but the president doesn't matter all that much. I mean, it was better, ultimately it was better that Churchill was in control of England than, somebody else during World War II.
Absolutely.
It was important that Reagan was in charge in the 80s, although maybe I don't think he was as decisive as like a Churchill, et cetera, or Lincoln or whatever. You can go on. But it doesn't matter as much as you think. But it's also on another level, like if I don't have the kind of permission to vote my conscience in the ballot box in America. All of my grandparents who came over here from crap countries then in Europe, my father's side was from Ireland, my mother's side from Italy. If I can say that, I'm sorry, I should have asked first, but it's like I want to vote. I want to vote for the person who most expresses my beliefs, and so so what? Like it isn't, and don't blame me. I voted for Gary Johnson. Don't blame me. If your candidate can't win, it ain't my problem. It's my problem that my candidate can't win. But then more importantly, politics is an ecosystem. It's kind of like, how on Peanuts when, what was his name? Pigpen, the dirty kid, would walk around and there'd be like this cloud of dust. You couldn't see him.
Right.
Politics and the direction of politics is kind of like that. And it's never about one single vote. It's never about one single person or one law or one catastrophe. What is the direction? And I actually think by vocalizing your beliefs in the straightest terms possible, in the most public terms possible, in the most persuasive and insistent terms possible, even if you are calling for stuff that nobody is into, you're helping to add to that cloud and kind of shift the direction of politics. It is never as fast as you want or as decisive, and the minute you start moving in this direction, the forces kind of start blowing it this way. But to me, that's the way I think about when I vote.
And the argument, which you've heard 1,000 times, will be, you got the Supreme Court, and Hillary would have gone in one direction, and Trump is going in another.
I firmly believe, this is that appeals to the Supreme Court are like, it's like appeals to patriotism. It's the last refuge to which a scoundrel clings. The Supreme Court matters. It matters far less than anybody thinks. The Supreme Court. To take a step back, in the book I wrote with Matt Welch, The Declaration of Independence, How Libertarian Politics Can Fix What's Wrong with America, we said politics is a lagging indicator of America, the direction that American society, the business culture, the arts culture, the lifestyle culture, the personal, it's a lagging indicator, and the Supreme Court tends to ratify social consensus. It does not create social consensus. Sometimes, it gets out a little bit in front, but to take a very controversial example, abortion rights were coming to America in the early 70s. They had already been put in place in California and New York. Other states were doing it. When the Supreme Court said abortion is legal, it was not as radical as it would have been in 1963 rather than 1973. There are arguments why you don't want the Supreme Court to be doing that for all sorts of reasons that I think, I share mostly. But in the same way, when the Supreme Court in 1896 ruled for de jure segregation and inaugurated Jim Crow in Plessy versus Ferguson, unfortunately and sadly, they were ratifying a social consensus, just as when they overturned all of that in 1954's Brown versus Board of Education, they were ratifying a social consensus. So I think people who use the Supreme Court, it's because they're out of better ideas.
Interesting.
Yeah.
This is certainly a discussion I'd love to have more in depth. Maybe we can have you back on again one day and
I promise
go into
not to curse.
great details.
I apologize for that.
No, bad words we can hear.
Okay.
So folks can find you again
at Reason.com, at Reason TV. We've got a great podcast. It's called The Reason Podcast. That's at iTunes. It's also at Reason SoundCloud. And Reason Magazine is, I think it's $15-20 a year for 11 issues.
Great.
It's a beautiful magazine. And if you buy a print subscription, you get access to everything on the website, including archives going back to 1968. I always read old issues for the ads. The ads hold up much more, than
I've got a Reagan Chesterfield ad on my wall. Yeah. Nick Gillespie, thank you so much.
Thank
you very much. And folks,
you,
don't forget to follow us at iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. Just look for Whiskey Politics and subscribe. Give us a 5-star recommendation. We'll see you back here at Whiskey Politics and on Ricochet. Thanks again, Nick Gillespie. Thanks. Bye-bye.